Need food reserves? Well, come on over to eFoods Global at booksmart.myfoods.com. Again, that's booksmart.myfoods.com. eFoods Global is the gold standard of food reserves. Tell them Wise Wolf sent you. Welcome to the Wise Wolf Project. I'm your host, Wise Wolf. It is Thursday, March 24th, 2011, 2 minutes after the hour. As I was reading this article online, a thought came to me that basically said, boy, does this sound familiar. I'm going to read to you a paragraph, and then I'm going to elaborate only briefly. Because if you've been paying attention at all, this should sound familiar. Here's the paragraph. So, what do you think they did? That's right. They did what they always do in such circumstances. They intervened massively. They organized something known as the London Gold Pool, which operated from November 1961 to March 1968. The gold pool was a price suppression scheme operated by the Bank of England at the behest of the United States. It fed gold supplied by the U.S. and 7 European countries into the London bullion market. The 7 became 6 after France pulled out in 1967 and moved conspicuously to the buy side. The gold pool was a costly failure. On its final day of operation alone, the pool participants lost 400 metric tons of gold. Let that sink in just a moment. Now, does this sound familiar to you? Price suppression scheme operated by the Bank of England involving the United States. Does this sound familiar? Being a costly failure, they lost 400 metric tons of gold. You see, at this particular point in time, the government of the United States was running, and I know you won't believe this, but they were running deficits. I know. Hard to imagine. But they were running deficits. They were spending way more money than they had, on top of the fact that they had the Vietnam War. Sound familiar? And when you are running, when you're on a gold standard and you're running deficits, what happens is your gold, people call your gold. If you're going to flood the world, the market with your dollars, we're going to call your bluff. We don't want these because you're debasing your currency. So what we want is the gold. We want the gold. So people were starting to figure that out, and the government at that time had set the price of gold at $35. But that was in relation to the amount of money that had already been printed. When you start printing more money, obviously the price of gold cannot stay fixed at $35. And the world knew it. And so what they would do is they would buy the gold from the U.S. at $35 and then go and sell it at the true market price, which was around $40. Right? That was how things worked. That was how things were done. And so you'd make yourself a cool 14% just by that action alone. And so what ends up happening is, since people know that, gold started coming out of the government's coffers, the U.S. government's coffers. It started leaving. So they had to wait a minute. We have to keep the gold price down so that people won't buy it, so that people won't think it's worth anything. Does this sound familiar to you? And so they created this elaborate scheme to where they would sell their bullion to the Bank of England, and then the Bank of England, their London bullion market, which is, I guess, would be the equivalent today of the LBMA, they would sell it. Well, doesn't this sound familiar? I recall, just refreshing my a recollection, a few years ago, the IMF, which is in cahoots with the U.S. government, selling, what was it, 400 something tons of gold, and they wouldn't let Eric Sprott buy it, right? And right now we have J.P. Morgan, who has collected the books of Bear Stearns' silver short book, and they are selling short silver that they don't have, more silver than that's actually mined on an annual basis. Does this sound familiar? All in an effort to keep the price down. And just like what happened 50 years ago, when the article says that the participants lost 400 metric tons of gold, that's what's happening now. Every time they knock the price down, people realize that the United States government is not going to stop printing money. And if they're going to keep knocking the price down, people are going to keep buying the physical. That's what's happening. Does this sound familiar to you? Well, I hope it does, because the sentence that's most important out of what I just read was the gold pool was a costly failure. Which means they were not victorious, which means there was an end to it. So this stuff that is carrying on with J.P. Morgan, and anybody else, the Fed and all of that, who are all in cahoots, in collusion of doing this, they will not win. They will fail. But that's my time. I hope you've learned something here. Remember, the invisible is more powerful and more important than the visible. Think about it.